Hi, I'm Kate Harrison. I'm the City Council member representing the downtown, and I'm really excited to introduce this session as food is a specialty of our downtown, as we all know. I'm really delighted to have this opportunity to hand over the stage to Davia Nelson, who's part of the Kitchen Sisters. You've probably heard them on NPR many, many times. And their latest piece is Kimchi Diplomacy, War and Peace and Food. It just earned the 2017 James Beard Award. And also, the Kitchen Sisters, you may not know this, are also behind The Hidden World of Girls on NPR, which is hosted or narrated by Tina Fey. Their work spans beyond food to the rest of the cultural issues. So with that, I will introduce Davia, and I want to thank you all for coming to our festival, the third in the series, third time we've done this downtown, and we hope to continue in future years. So thank you for your attendance. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you all for coming. Welcome, welcome all to the Bay Area Book Festival and this conversation with Samin Nosrat and with Wendy MacNaughton, the creators of the book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat, Mastering the Elements of Good Cooking. As she said, I'm Davia Nelson, half of NPR's Kitchen Sisters, and I've been working with my radio partner, Nikki Silver, for some 30 years. So anytime I sort of sense a collaboration between two people, two women in particular, I'm always, my antenna go up. So when I heard that Samin, who is one of the most astounding chefs I know and have met, and who has worked her way up the kitchen in Chez Panisse, who has taken kitchen road trips through Pakistan, through Iran, through Cuba, who cooked in some of the finest restaurants in Italy, who cooks for every cause that matters to her in Bay Area and in the world, and who has, I could go on about Samin, who studied food with Michael Pollan, food journalism with Michael Pollan, and Michael Pollan in turn studied food with Samin. When I heard that Samin was collaborating with Wendy MacNaughton, who I refer to as Studs Terkel in high heels, only it's a pen and an ink instead of a tape recorder. Wendy, who is the author of Meanwhile in San Francisco, graphic illustrator, graphic journalist that she is, her columns in the Rumpus, her back-page column on California Sunday, her collaborations on Gutsy Girls, on Knives and Ink, I could go on. When I heard that these two were about to collaborate, I thought, watch out, world. These two women are pistols, and and it is what brings us all together here now, to see what this collaboration has wrought. We're going to talk. We're going to open it up for questions. Afterwards, they'll be signing books outside that our beloved Green Apple Books will be selling.
Yay, Green
Apple.
Yay,
Green Apple. Okay, Wonder Women, let's kick this thing off, shall we?
Yeah.
Okay, Samin, before we get into, how many of you have seen this book? Pretend that every time I hold up the book, there is a screen and you're seeing large, full-scale color drawings and Wendy's illustrations, but Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Okay, so the 4 cardinal directions of cooking that Samin has come to see as a method and present. I wanted to ask you to talk about a line I saw you wrote. I grew up in a house filled with language, customs, and food of another time and place. I'm wondering where that house is, who's in it, and what's on the table.
Oh, good. My family's from Iran, and my parents came. Woo!
Iran in the house.
And my parents came over from Iran in the mid-'70s and settled in San Diego, where I was born and where I grew up. And my mom, it was a really uncertain time for them in a lot of ways. And I think they weren't completely sure whether, as a family, we'd go back and whether she'd be able to raise her kids there or here. So my mom was so committed to creating the culture of Iran in our house. And she said things to us. I have two brothers, younger brothers. They're 4 years younger than me. So she would say to us things like, when you're in this house, you're in Iran, and when you go outside, when you go to school, you're in America. But when you cross this threshold, you speak Farsi, you respect your elders, we eat Persian food, and this is, she really worked very hard to create another time and place, the Iran that she knew for us. And she really is an extraordinary cook. And so she, my experience of my childhood, I always say, was spent 40% of the time in the car, like driving all around Southern California to find that perfect, flatbread from this bakery in Irvine, or or the perfect bunch of cilantro from the international market, on the other side of town. So there was this way where my mom was always after, and the best compliment in our family for food was, oh, that tastes like Iran. And I didn't fully ever really understand what that meant until many years later when I was working at Chez Panisse, where I had really become familiar with farms and farmers markets and the whole sort of landscape of knowing where your food comes from. And there are these little citrus fruits called the quichus, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that Alice Waters is obsessed with, and they're a big thing at Chez Panisse. And so I brought a big bag of the quichus and dates home, which are a pretty classic Chez Panisse fruit bowl. I don't know, should we invite that guy in? Like, it feels weird to just ignore him. Okay, someone's talking to him. All right, so we brought this fruit bowl. I brought these quichus and dates to my mom and my aunts and my grandma and everybody, like, they ripped them open and they were like, this tastes like home. This tastes so good. And I realized the home, that they were after was the same thing that we were after at Chez Panisse, which was the deepest flavor and, like, the most sort of the fruits and vegetables that were grown with the most integrity. And so my mom was always after those things, and she would cook the most extraordinary Persian food, which is mostly a rice-based cuisine, making really beautiful rice, and the tadig, the crispy rice where you turn out the pot, and it's just like this incredible cake of crispy rice that we would all fight over. And all of the stews, so many of them are based with herbs and vegetables and lamb and chicken. And so my brothers and I, we had no idea how good we had it, but it tasted pretty good. And so our table became the center of everything in our family, and all of my aunts and uncles and grandparents and neighbors and everyone was always over. That was sort of the heart of our family culture. Yeah.
And spoiler alert, though this is not a Persian cookbook, the rice dish, the Persianish rice. Persianish rice is one of the dishes in this book as well, which we will... I read somewhere that you were hoping, or your initial vision was to write a cookbook without recipes.
No recipes, yeah.
Talk about that.
Well, so I hate recipes. I hate everything about them. And I hate following them. I hate writing them. I hate telling people to write them. I hate other people following mine, and I got something wrong, and then they email me and tell me that. I hate everything. And and so to me, I just didn't want any part of this to have any part of that. But in terms of publishing a cookbook, that was just probably not possible. Like they probably would have given me 75 cents to write a book without recipes. So I had financially to add some recipes in there. And I also, I'm sure we'll talk about the philosophy, so I won't go too deeply into it. But the idea behind this method of cooking and teaching people this, like, universal theory of good cooking is so that you can always know what to do next and what your next move is in the kitchen to make your food taste good. And if you know that, if you know where you're going, if you have the roadmap sort of already in your head, you don't need to rely on a recipe to tell you what to do. And the thing about it is most recipes are not, I'm not going to say they're not all tested, but a recipe is a snapshot of a moment in time of one dish made in one perfect ideal circumstance. And food is always changing. It's changing with the seasons and how you're storing it at your house. You pick corn, and tomorrow it's less sweet because those sugars have started to turn into starches. So if I tell you to add this much corn into something, maybe if you're making it 2 days from now, it will need also a little bit of sugar, to be equally sweet. And there's a way where you need to know what you're looking for in order to know where to go. And I feel like recipes have never given you that. And so I turned this into a curriculum, and I started teaching this over and over, and students would come 15, 20, 30 hours to these classes. And at the end of it, and all through the classes, we're tasting, and I'm so proud of them, and they're using their instincts, and we're getting there, and we're making delicious food, and I'm so excited. I'm just seeing them in my mind go off to cook instinctually from here on until forever. And then every single time without fail, on the very last day of class, at the end of class, they'd be like, okay, cool, where's the recipe packets? I mean, so I realized, I couldn't just expect people to get in their bones this thing that had taken me many years to learn. So I feel like the recipes in here are training wheels, and I hope that you treat them as such. And I hope that, one of my friends said the thing most I could hope for this book is for it to become obsolete, to make itself obsolete, and that I hope that that's true. Yeah.
I love it. I love Michael Pollan wrote the introduction to this book, and he says, truth be told, recipes are infantilizing. They insist on fidelity and faith, but do nothing to earn it or explain it.
It's true.
I thought, to me, cooking without a recipe is sort of going on the wire without a net or a pole. So I like that this book, we're going to get to Samin's method, which we keep alluding to here, and her larger vision of how to cook. But first I want to bring Wendy. How did you and Wendy take up with each other? How did this collaboration come to be born?
I think that Samin, you have to tell. This is a Samin story for sure. We hadn't met actually before this
internet
all started. But yeah, you guys have heard of the internet. Samin is really good at using it.
Everyone's like, oh, how did you meet so-and-so? I'm like, oh, internet stalking.
Yeah.
So how did I meet Wendy? Internet stalking. As Davia mentioned, she had this incredible column for a long time on the Rumpus, which I followed very closely. I knew everything about it. And I was a really big fan. I don't know if you're not familiar with the work of Wendy MacNaughton, remedy that and become familiar, because she is so funny. And
this book is a good place to start.
Yeah. She's really, really funny. And I...
pretend large screen.
Large screen.
And I want, to me, cooking is all about joy, and it's the joy of doing it and the joy of sharing the food with the people around you. And I really wanted to bring that joy and that whimsy and that sense of humor into the book. So when I realized that this was the book I had to make, I knew it couldn't be photographed, which if you want, we can talk about that later too. And I knew what I wanted was for it to be illustrated, but not just by anyone, by Wendy MacNaughton. And so I don't think I told you this, but my friend Aaron, who's my best friend, was visiting recently, and he said, I can't believe you made this thing. I remember the day you were sitting in your living room, and we were talking about Wendy, and you said, I wonder if I just wrote her an email if she'd consider doing this.
Wow.
So I wrote this email, which we dug up in my email recently. It was from 2011.
It's quite an email.
And it said, the subject was, you might think I'm stalking you. And then, and then it says, and you would be right. Yeah. And it turned out we had a lot of friends in common, so I sent her this thing, and I was like, I love you, I want you to do my book.
Wait, she did this another thing also, which was amazing. That was quite an email to get. Either you keep reading or you close your computer and you put it away really fast, right? But so come on, so charming. Then the second thing she did was, I do a lot of diagrams in the book, and I've been doing them for a long time, and I used to do a lot of Venn diagrams, and Samin made this diagram of people that we know and why we should work together. And it was the best. I mean, it was one of the best love letters I have ever received in my life.
That was good. It worked.
And Wendy, how much cooking were you doing? How much knowledge of cooking did you have at the point when she asked you to illustrate
Exactly this much. None. And I don't think Samin really realized that. Like I said, oh no, I'm not much of a chef, But then when Samin, I think the first time she came over to our house, I warned her, we don't really have any food in the house. And she, opened the cabinet. She's like, well, let's see what we have to work with in here, And she's like, we have 12 boxes of balance bars.
No, there's no pots, no
nothing.
pans.
That was it. So
like slate.
Yeah, and I think I was a little bit nervous about this. I'm sure you were totally freaked out. But it turned out to be a really great thing because I think for two reasons. One is I draw from life a lot. I prefer to draw that way. I think drawing from life gives a line that is of a moment as opposed to kind of like a tense, kind of what a photograph is, like capturing something in the past. So I like to draw from life. So Samin had to actually demonstrate everything and show me how to do these things, and I'd be over her shoulder drawing the whole time. And the other reason is because I ended up being like this.
Great guinea pig.
I was a guinea
She
pig.
was like, what the heck are you talking about?
Yeah. She would say, could you like cut that in a X fashion or whatever? I'd be like, what? Like, could you dice? What does that mean? You know? So, yeah, she really taught me how to cook from the ground up.
I love it. Well, let's just delve a little bit into this book and maybe say how you came to your method. Why don't you just read
Oh, sure.
from here to here, just so people can feel.
Sure. This is, as I was, I learned to cook at Chez Panisse up the street, and I was an intern in the kitchen, and this is sort of when I started to make sense of everything. I started to see some basic patterns in the seemingly impenetrable maze of daily changing seasonal menus. Tough cuts of meat were salted the night before, while delicate fish fillets were seasoned at the time of cooking. Oil for frying had to be hot, otherwise food would get soggy, while butter for tart dough had to remain cold so that the crust would crisp up and become flaky. A squeeze of lemon or splash of vinegar could improve almost every salad, soup, and braise. Certain cuts of meat were always grilled, while others were always braised. Salt, fat, acid, and heat were the 4 elements that guided basic decision-making in every single dish, no matter what. The rest was just a combination of cultural, seasonal, or technical details, for which we could consult cookbooks and experts, histories, and maps. It was a revelation. Yeah, and it was amazing because when this happened, it was this light bulb moment, and I went to one of the chefs and I said, Chris, I figured this out. Salt, fat, acid, heat. It's amazing. I figured it out. It's the theory at work here. It's not in any of the cookbooks. I feel like I understand now. It's incredible. And he looked at me. He was not impressed. He was like, yeah, we all know that. I was like, maybe you could have shared that with me a year and a half ago. I don't know. Yeah.
So okay, at what point did the title come to you? I know, I'm going to call the book Salt, Fat, Acid, Heat. Let me hear you all say that together, just so we get that imprinted. Brandy, who's in the audience, who I work with, we this week, as we were prepping this interview, would just walk around the office snapping. So Brandy, start a snapping for just... Okay, everybody.
Salt,
Fat,
acid, heat. Salt, fat, acid, heat. Salt, fat,
You got it.
Because
You know I was going to say salt, acid, heat, fat, right? You know I was going to say. So it's salt. So at what point did the title reveal itself along with the method?
I think for me, since this was 17 years ago, I had this light bulb moment, and I think it's always been there. There's always been sort of this just under the surface, salt, fat, acid, heat, salt, fat, acid, heat. But for sure, I knew it had to be the title of the book when I started working with Michael Pollan, and he would interview me periodically when I was teaching him how to cook, so he would have quotes from me to put in his book, Cooked. And very quickly, he picked up on my obsession with these 4 things, because I hadn't fully articulated it. It was just there. And he said, what's the deal? Yeah, and I said, oh, yeah, that's my book. Like, that's the book I've always wanted to write. That's my system. And he said, yeah, you have to do it. Go make it into a curriculum. Go make it into your book, and you already have the title. So I just had to stay on that track and not let anybody else say, that sounds too scientific, or that sounds boring. I don't know what that means, I was like, it's okay, you will know. And soon we're all going to be walking around like this. Yeah. Yeah.
So walk people through salt, fat, acid, heat, just just explain the 4 cardinal rules, the principles.
Okay.
The rules by which we live in the kitchen.
So basically, salt is what makes food taste good. It is the first and foremost, the most powerful flavor enhancer that we have in the kitchen. It literally will unlock flavors and make them more accessible to your palate. It unlocks aromas, and such a big part of taste is smell. So if you're able to smell things as you eat them, as you bite into them, you actually get a much more powerful experience of flavor. A big part of salt, a lot of people are like, you use so much salt, and you need to use less. Yeah, I definitely use more than the average home cook, but I also think if you're eating out a lot, if you're eating a lot of processed food, you're probably eating more salt than how much I'm instructing you to use. But it's not necessarily, using salt properly isn't necessarily about using more. It's about knowing when to add it and how to add it. So for things, particularly for meat, I think you really can't add it too early. I mean, I guess you could add it. We have a joke in the book that if you add it 3 years ago, you're making provisions for the apocalypse.
You're ready to like cross the country in a wagon.
So don't do that. But if you go to the butcher shop, if you go to the grocery store and you come home with a chicken or a cut of beef or something, go ahead and salt it, even if you're going to eat it tomorrow or the next day, because giving salt time to travel into your food and diffuse all throughout it will do a couple things. One, it means that every bite of your meat will be seasoned evenly. And not just when you salt, if you salt a piece of chicken right before you throw it in the oven, then the salt's on the skin and the inside's bland. Whereas if you give it time to travel within and dissolve completely, then every bite is evenly seasoned, and it's so delicious. And the second thing it does for meat is it actually, this is a complicated science thing that I am so bad at talking about, so forgive me. It's like unofficial words in the book. But basically, so I like to use my hair to demonstrate this. But if you kind of can imagine a protein as a slinky spring that's just floating in like some water, protein strands are these coils. And when you cook them, the coils shrink and tighten. That's what I like to imagine them as. And they start to squeeze out some of that water that's they're floating around in. But if you actually think about it, in your food, water is moistness. Water is tenderness. Water inside your meat, that's where you want it to stay. You don't want it to all squeeze out and cook out, because that's when you get dry, overcooked meat. So when you pre-salt your meat, the salt actually sort of disables the proteins from squeezing as tightly and as much, and it also turns the proteins a little bit into a jelly kind of thing, a gel type thing. And so a lot more water stays in. And a lot of times people will say, well, doesn't salt draw water out? Doesn't it turn food, doesn't it dry out meat? Because you can see that pile of water, or like a little puddle of water after you salted stuff. But even that amount of water that comes out is, to me, like less important than the amount of moisture retaining qualities that you get from salting your meat early. So salt everything earlier, and taste and salt again, and taste and salt again. Sort of, you have to divorce yourself from this idea of that salt belongs in this shaker on the table. Get rid of the salt shaker on the table. Move the salt into the kitchen. Dump it out of a shaker into a bowl where you can put all 5 of your fingers, and start using it earlier in your cooking. That will make a big difference.
So, Wendy, how did you take on the idea of illustrating salt? What are people going to find here?
I think there's some charts, there's some representational drawings of items, and then there's some demonstrations. So the charts, for example, there's a salting calendar that Samin referred to about, like, you can salt your, it actually refers to the iCal calendars, that you use. And you can kind of look at the different colors and go back in time and figure out what you should be salting when. There's also...
My favorite one is 3 days in advance. Whole pig for a birthday luau. Whole lamb or goat for your typical ceremonial roast. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then so this was really fun also, is the different kinds of salt. This is something I had absolutely no idea about. Do you guys know that different salts have different structures? Like when you put them under a microscope, okay, you knew that. Well, I didn't know that. So under a microscope, they're really beautiful. So we called up a friend of ours named Alexis Madrigal, who is like a science writer, or like a tech writer, and he happens to have a microscope. So I went over there, and we put different salt grains underneath the different salt crystals underneath, and then I photographed them and then drew those, so you can actually see the different structures.
It's so cool.
Because of course, like, some are thinner and shaped like a pyramid that would be Malden, and that would provide more of a crunch, right? Whereas something that's like a sea salt that's more compact, like that, is going to be used in a totally different way. So that was fun. And also, I think this is the most fun thing about salt. Samin taught me to get rid of the shaker, and that there are 3 salt gestures. Do you guys know about the 3 salt gestures?
Emojis.
Yes, we call them that's true. We call them the salt emojis. We still have to make them.
Yeah.
When we reach our goal, there will be salt emojis in the phone. There's the pinch. It's like this, right? And then there's the handful. The handful first, right? Yeah,
that's
and
for
then,
like a pot of pasta water.
Like this, handful. And then there's
the wrist wag.
The wrist wag, which is a whole palmful, like going out like that. Yeah. So, yeah, it's fun to explore how to communicate all of this. Like, like Samin does refer to the science a lot. It's like really meaty, and we use the illustrations in a way to communicate all this stuff in like a really quick, visual, accessible way.
There's a line on page 36 that I love that says, season your cooking water until it's as salty as the sea, or more accurately, your memory of the sea.
Oh, yeah, because I was like, I don't want to get caught on a technicality here, because technically the seawater is super salty. So don't salt your water until it's salty as the sea, because that's like 3.5% salt. And I actually didn't really even understand this, but some of my friends who are cooks were camping down in Mexico, and they were cooking in seawater because they were camping down on the beach. And they were like, it was unpalatable. It was so disgusting. Like, it was so gross. Don't ever do that. So don't do that. So just sort of think about how salty you think the sea.
Idea.
Yeah, romantic idea. Not the actual.
Salt,
don't Google how
sea.
salty is the sea and then do that.
Yeah.
All right, that's a little bit on salt. Let's move to fat.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So fat is kind of, to me, so whereas salt is all about enhancing flavor, fat has these kind of double role. One is that it carries flavors. It's actually an incredible sort of transporter of flavor. A lot of flavors that are not water soluble are fat soluble. So a great way to imagine that is if you take a clove of garlic and slice it, and you put, you have two little pots. You have a pan with a little bit of olive oil in it and a little pan with some water in it, and you put a little garlic in each one and sizzle it for a little while, or just let it simmer, and then remove the garlic. If you dip your finger in that water and taste that water, it sort of tastes like, I don't know, watery, a little vaguely garlicky. But the oil, on the other hand, will have really exchanged flavor molecules with that garlic and be this incredible garlicky oil. And so fat has this incredible capacity to bring flavor into our mouth and to carry it. And as such, I think of it as the foundation of food. And that a really important thing for me was there was a contest early on in my cooking career at Chez Panisse for making, like, they wanted someone in the restaurant to come up with the new standard tomato sauce recipe for the restaurant. And the winner would receive $500, and your name was going to be on the menu for all the eternity. And so, it was a big deal, and everyone was really excited and was trying to cook all this stuff. And I was too intimidated to enter, but I remember the day when we had to bring it. And the panel of judges was Alice and the chefs. And so everyone was all abuzz, and people had made all this stuff at home and brought it in. And I remember one of the chefs came back to the kitchen for a glass of water after he had been tasting all afternoon, and we were like, who's winning? What's happening? And he said, it's the craziest thing. Like, a lot of them are actually really good, but Alice can't get over the fact that they had used sort of substandard olive oil at home, and this olive oil had penetrated the taste of the thing. So even though, like, the potential for various sauces was so good, she just was so bothered by the taste of the olive oil that she couldn't imagine it. And it sort of really hit me, that you could have a palate so sophisticated that you could taste what olive oil tastes like in something like tomato sauce. And B, that the olive oil would be so important in something like tomato sauce that it would define the flavor. And I really came to realize, at the time when I was working there, I don't know anymore, but they were spending over $100,000 a year on olive oil at that place. And that's crazy. That's a lot of money for, like, but, and I remember at one point they were trying to save money in the kitchen, and they asked Alice, like, why don't we change to a different olive oil? And she said, no, this defines the flavor of our food, And so, the fat really defines the flavor of your cooking. So that's one part. And the other part is that fat also has this incredible capacity to give us all of these different extraordinary textures in our cooking. And so I did a whole thing where I had, like, a lot of Post-its on the wall, and I was trying to think of all the different textures in foods, and I realized that they all fall into 5 categories, really. And these are the things that fat makes possible for us: are crispy foods, flaky textures in pastries, and tender textures in pastries. Creamy things like emulsions, like mayonnaise or ice cream or milk, those are all emulsions. And of course, tender and flaky, and lightness, things that are light. Fat has this amazing capacity to entrap air, and you get things like whipped cream or the butter that we whip air into to become a cake batter. So understanding that you can treat the same fats differently to get these different textures is a kind of amazing tool to then understand what you need to do next in a recipe. Or if you're just looking for a cake recipe, one of the things for me, a big aha moment was I always loved cake mix cakes, mostly because my mom would never let me have them. And so she always would buy like the fanciest cake from the European bakery, and it would be this dense chocolate cake. And I was like, I don't want that. I want Betty Crocker, because that's what my friends had. And so to me, I have this weird like nostalgia for Betty Crocker. And so when I started baking and cooking, I always was after that. I wanted to make that. And I could never figure out how to make it. And then one day, this cook at Chez Panisse brought a birthday cake in for another cook, and she cut into it, and I was like, is this a Betty Crocker? It's so good. And she was like, no. And I said, can I please have the recipe? And so she gave me the recipe, and it was a cocoa. It actually is remarkably similar to the recipe on the side of the Hershey's cocoa box. It's just like cocoa, sugar, water, oil, all this stuff. And then I was like, this is so good. So I started making, and a little while later, I had the ginger cake at Chez Panisse, which again had that same texture, and I was like, what's the deal? This is so good. And when I got the recipe, I compared them. I realized they were both made with oil. And what's cake mix? It's like you add oil and eggs and water, versus all of these other cakes that are so rich and made with butter. So then I realized, I can just look at a recipe. I get my food magazine. I can look at the cake recipe and know what the texture of the thing is going to be before I even start. If it's made with butter, it's going to have this texture. If it's made with oil, it's going to be this light, moist thing. So it was kind of unlocking these clues. So fat is really a good, it's the clues to the texture. Clues to the texture, yeah.
I love that. So Wendy, this is Wendy's Fats of the World of Fat. I don't know how much you can see, but Wendy, how did you come up with this concept?
So there's 3 wheels in the book. There's the world of fat, there's the world of flavor, which is spices, and there's the world of acid. And Samin had this, she has an encyclopedic knowledge, of all of the different kinds of, say, fats, in where, in each part of the world, what different fat is used there. Same with the different spices and the different acids. And we were trying to figure out how to communicate this. She had an idea at first.
I said, I think what you should do is draw a whole map of the world, and then in really teeny tiny letters, we can write on every country their appropriate ingredients.
Yeah, and I'm like, no. No, we're not going to do that. And so what she was talking about was basically a flow chart, right? It breaks it down into all these different things. But since it's such a huge amount of information, the simplest structure to do that is to create a 360-degree flow chart. That's a wheel. So these wheels, they all fold out in the book, and they all tell you can basically go and look for acids, flavors, and fats, depending on whatever you're cooking, from whatever part of the world you want to work with. You go there and you can find what fat to work with. And the other thing that was kind of fun about these wheels is trying to figure out, it's a wheel, it's information, it's graphics, we're communicating stuff graphically, but we still want it to be beautiful. We still want it to be a pleasure to look at. So color is a big part of that. And choosing the colors was actually a challenge at first. There's some artists who have a very innate sense of color, and they really love, putting a certain green against a certain turquoise or whatever it is, and it just gives them this big zing, For me, I totally don't get that at all. I don't. That's not the way my brain works. I like things to mean something, them to refer to something that tells a story. So when I couldn't figure out a color palette just, off the top of my head, I went back to these old paintings that I studied in art school, and the old masters. So the fat one refers to, the colors are taken from a painting by an artist named Clara Peters, who did a beautiful tabletop setting that had cheeses and milks and all of these and beautiful pottery and all this stuff. And so I pulled something, the colors from that. So nobody knows that, okay? Nobody's gonna get it.
We know,
but we know that.
Now you know.
And also maybe it does kind of give a sense. When I look at that painting, it gives me this kind of visceral sense of what Samin's talking about. So maybe that might come through in the colors as well.
And there was a Caravaggio, which I love.
A Caravaggio, yeah. Anyway.
I just want to quote a couple of lines from the fat chapter because I just love them. Samin calls emulsions a temporary peace treaty between fat and water.
Yeah.
And on the, wait a minute,
so
where's
good.
the drawing? Let's show the drawing first.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Will you hold that up, please?
Of course.
Okay. How to fix a broken mayonnaise. Samin, there's Wendy's rendition, and here's what Samin has to say about that. One of her lines, whisk with the urgency of a swimmer escaping a shark.
It's true. You can't go fast enough, yeah.
I love that. Blanching and boiling. I'm leaping up to heat. Oops.
No, go for it. It's okay.
I just like this quote. Blanching is boiling by another name, and the key to both is to keep the water at a boil. In Salt, I described how food needs to frolic when boiled in salty waves to cook evenly. I love that. So you surf, is that right?
I try to. I'm very, very poorly. Yeah.
You like it? Does surfing impact your cooking? Does cooking impact your surfing?
Yes. Well, whenever you get out of the ocean, you're really hungry, or I am. So that's one way. I'm always thinking about food. But it is, I've only come to surfing. I grew up in San Diego. I was a brown kid in a very white place. My high school was like 3 blocks from the ocean. Some people took surfing actually as PE. I was not one of those people. I didn't, in the 90s in San Diego, there wasn't open arms of like opening me into the ocean surfing community. I don't know. I always watched from afar. It was something I wanted to do. And then maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I made some friends down in Santa Cruz, part of this incredible surfing community, and a lot of them are like incredible female surfers, and I got a woman surf instructor, and they just were like, yeah, you can do it. And I'm like kind of out of shape and not that coordinated, and they just said, you can do it. And to me, I've always loved the ocean. Like, I've always had a very intense relationship to the ocean, and so I'm not afraid of the ocean. So they really encouraged me to start doing it. And what I love about it, and what is similar to cooking about it for me, is it's a thing that I get to be a total beginner at, that I'm really bad at, that I have zero control over. And the only way I'm ever going to get better is to practice. So I really started surfing around the time I was starting to write this book. And I did go to a place where I understood what it was to be like beginner's mind, and trying to remember how it must feel, or how it did feel, to not know anything about the kitchen, and that you don't have any control. And but it is all, both of them are very deeply sensual experiences, and about being very attuned to your senses, and listening and looking and feeling when a wave is going to come, and listening and looking and seeing and tasting when your chicken's done. And so there was a way where they were both it was a great training, and a great sort of reminder about the kinds of things that are important to me as a cook, to learn this new skill. Yeah.
You have this great quote in the book from Marion Cunningham, who probably a lot of people know of, who lived here in the Bay Area for so long, was Fannie Farmer for many years, wrote under her own name as well, great home cook. And you say, you can't cook with your head, right?
Yeah.
You have to cook, you take your quote.
No, you take it.
You have to taste and taste and
you
taste.
You just got to taste.
Yeah.
I mean, everything is tasting, and that was for sure. That was something that blew my mind at Chez Panisse. I didn't really understand the power of that, but it's just built into the fabric of that place. Before every service, we taste, or I say we, I don't work there anymore, but we would taste every single dish that was going to go out that night, since the menu was changing. You're tasting all throughout your cooking. I had this great moment I'll never forget when I was learning how to use salt, and I got the great honor to make polenta for the first time. And we used to get this polenta from this tiny mill farm in northern Italy, and it was this really exquisite, very corny tasting thing, so delicious, but you have to stir it, really crazy to make sure it doesn't stick and burn. And so I stirred it like crazy. I spent all day very much babying it, probably way too much attention on this pot of polenta, and I felt so proud. I put the Parmesan cheese, and I felt like, oh, it's so good. It's so good. I put butter in there, and I brought a spoonful. And anytime as a baby cook, as you're doing something, you always have to have another cook sign off on it. So I brought a spoonful to the chef. His name's Cal. He's written 2 great books. He's around here somewhere. We just saw him at the farmer's market. I brought a spoonful to Cal, and he's this really tall guy, 6'4". He has super dry, he just has a very dry sense of humor, and he's very, if you don't know him, you don't necessarily know if he's making fun of you. So I was very scared, of Cal. So I brought him this spoonful of polenta, and he tasted it, and he was like, yeah, it needs more salt. So I went back to the pot, and I got the whole thing, and this massive pot of salt, and I put this, 2 little pinches, 4 grains of salt in this whole thing, and I stirred it. I was like, oh, it tastes pretty good. And I brought a spoonful to him, and he didn't even respond. He just brought me back to the pot and put 3 massive handfuls. And so it was this thing where I was like, how could I have been so far off? How did I not know? And to me, watching him do that to the thing, I was like, oh, he's ruining it. It's over. And I tasted it, and it just tasted like corn. It tasted like Parmesan cheese. It tasted so delicious. Like, salty was not a word that applied to this thing. And it was a really good lesson for me to understand, not only do I have to taste at the end of something and know what it is that I'm after, but I have to taste all along in the process to know where I am and to really be constantly readjusting my course. And to me, if there's one thing that I can get people to do, it's to teach them what they're tasting for and just learn you got to taste all the way through.
You've been talking about Chez Panisse. You spoke about how you wrote Wendy a letter. There's sort of writing letters is a bit of a theme in your life. You want to?
Sure. There have been 2 other big letters in my career for sure. I mean, I'm trying to remember the first letter I ever wrote. I had an art author I really loved as a little kid, and I found his address on the back of the book. I sent him one, but it's something I guess I've always done. But after I had this very inspiring meal at Chez Panisse, I wrote a letter to Alice Waters, who I just assumed that's who you write the letter to. And so I wrote this letter.
How old were you at that point?
I was 19, and I had this it was, my boyfriend and I had saved up for 9 months, and we had this amazing dinner. I'd never eaten at a fancy restaurant before, and it was just the food was good, but really just going there and being cared for and being fed, and all of our needs were taken care of. It was really amazing, and the dessert was chocolate souffle. And the server brought it to us, and she said, "Oh, have you ever had souffle before?" And I said, "No." She said, "Well, let me show you how to eat it. You poke a hole in it with your spoon, and you pour this raspberry sauce in, and then every bite has some sauce." So I took a bite, and she said, "How is it?" And I said, "It's good." I was like, "But it'd be better if I had some cold milk." And I had no idea that it was the rudest thing ever to tell them what would make it better. And also that it's completely unsophisticated to drink milk at night. And it's totally not okay in fine dining. But I still, to this day, do maintain that warm chocolate, cold milk is a pretty good combo. So she brought me milk, and she also brought us 2 glasses of dessert wine. And it was just this very sweet interaction. And to me, I'm like, oh, that was the beginning of my, culinary education. And so when I wrote the letter and I brought it in asking for a job as a busser, they directed me over to the floor manager's office, and I rounded the corner and knocked on the door, and they opened it, and the floor manager was the souffle lady. And so she remembered me, and I also think she was extraordinarily desperate because she hired me. She was like, "Can you start tomorrow?" So then I started the next day as a busser, and the letter helped. And then the other big letter was in 2006, I was working at a restaurant down on 4th Street in Berkeley, and it was called Ecolo. It's gone now, but every day I would check the reservations to see who was coming in, and did someone have a special thing, or did we need to make sure someone got a birthday candle or whatever. And I saw Michael Pollan's name in there, and so I wrote a little card, and I said, "Oh, I'm a big fan of yours. I would love to come study with you at the journalism school." And I gave it to the server and asked them to give it to him, and they did. And then a few weeks later, Michael wrote back, and I bet he regrets it to this day. But yeah, but then he wrote back, and he let me come take his class, which was sort of the introduction into this other wonderful community of writers. So now I have sort of these beautiful food community and journalism community that I get to be part of. It's awesome.
And Wendy, how did you find your way to illustration? What's your path?
Oh my God, how much time
How'd
do we
you get
have?
from there to here?
So I have this weird background of a few different things. I'm not going to do the trajectory. I'll say more that I have a background in drawing. I went to art school. I have a background in advertising, which is basically how to tell stories with, in very concise stories. And I have a background in social work, which, although people think about social work and it means a lot of different things, but to me, one of the biggest things it means is that social workers view things in terms of systems and how people within systems act upon each other. And we use a lot of diagrams to figure out how these pieces all interact, in a family or in a society. So if you take all of those things and you make a pie chart or whatever, a Venn diagram, I'm that thing right in the middle there. So I think that worked very well. Ironically, I never ever would have thought a cookbook would make sense for all of this, but all of those things I definitely brought it to bear on this with Samin.
I mean, it was amazing because there are so many systems in my head that don't make disorganized things or organizations that I didn't necessarily know how to articulate. And I would bring them to Wendy and I would say, can we make sense of this together? Is there a way, I see all these patterns in pastas. I see patterns in all the different kinds of ways that you can combine pasta and sauce. But I'm not sure how to make it an illustration. So together we figured out this great chart that Wendy made a hilarious title called The Pasta Nostra for.
Get it? Get it? It's called, wait, the subtitle's funny too.
Because I figured out that there's five basic families of pasta sauces, and if you can sort of make a master from each one, you can sort of figure out how to navigate your way through without recipes. And so we made this little map, and I sent it to her, and I kept calling it the circles of pasta or whatever. And then she retitled it and sent it back, and it said, The Pasta Nostra, the intermarriage of 5 great families.
That's funny.
It was really good. And then the other one,
I know it's not cool to laugh at your own jokes,
No.
but I'm really happy with that one.
That's all we do.
We laugh. That's what we do. So this is the other thing is that both of us we're really serious and really boring people. It was so much fun to work together, because we basically just came up with silly ways to communicate stuff, and it was fun and approachable. That's something that is really important to me in all artwork and all storytelling, is that it's super accessible and it grabs you by the heart, and is a joy. And that's kind of also who Samin is. So it worked really well for us to work together and figure out
This is the best.
how to
It's all downhill from here. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's open it up to questions and we have a mic that's going to roam the room. So does anyone have something? We didn't even get to
Sorry, you have to
acid
buy
and
the
heat,
book.
but we'll get to a
Yeah,
little bit
buy the
of
book.
that.
Sorry, dude.
So,
I talk too much.
No, you talk just perfectly. Anyone out there? I see in the way back. Let's start there. I see in the not so way back.
I can't wait to read your book. It
Oh,
sounds
thank
so
you.
interesting, but I have a question about salt, because I use very little salt, and I know it's really good for flavor, et cetera, et cetera. But what do you tell people who I don't have heart disease, but what do you tell people who have heart disease who are told not to use salt or to use very little salt?
Then
And
don't-
I know the food is boring and flavorless, and I see my mother, who's not supposed to have salt, dumping salt into things she shouldn't be doing.
Well, I don't. It doesn't have to be entirely boring and flavorless. And also, listen to your doctor over me. Yeah. Please do that. I'm not your doctor. So that's a good one. Start there. And also, there are a lot of other things we can do to add flavor in. And so certainly, the other sort of main, flavor things are fat, which is such a great, you don't even have to use, fat is this thing that, in the 80s became so maligned that now we're all afraid of it. You don't have to use a ton of fat, but a little bit of something creamy or even just full fat yogurt can make a big difference. Acid, we didn't get there, but it's a great flavor balancer. And so a lot of times food just needs something to be the counterpoint to the other stuff that's in the dish. So again, to me, I'm Iranian, so dollop of yogurt. Or using a squeeze of lime or a little bit of, I actually think Parmesan cheese, even if you have been instructed to use less salt, Parmesan cheese is sort of this magical ingredient because it has salt, it has acid, and it has an extraordinary amount of umami, which is that fifth taste of savoriness. And so it's sort of the secret thing that even a little Parmesan, less than you can even taste as cheese, if you sneak it in, can make a big flavor punch. I also think there are other ingredients that have that same umami thing going on, anything fermented, basically, will be a great source of acid and umami, including, this is a weird thing that I'm super into lately, is nutritional yeast. I don't know. Yeah. Strangely super duper, and just put it on all the things. But yeah, don't do the salt if your doctor told you not to do the salt, and make up for it with lots of herbs and spices and acid and some yogurt. Yep.
So one of the tips I picked up years ago was substituting applesauce for oil when you're baking something. Are there certain oil, sounds like texture is totally different. And like, are there certain oils that you can do it and get away with it, and certain oils that you shouldn't, or should you just always use oil and not go to the applesauce?
Okay, I've done that applesauce thing and it works, so I'm with you. I don't know why it works. I would say applesauce wouldn't work instead of butter in a pie crust, so don't try that one. Yeah. But I think, if it's working for you, just do it. Like, I'm not the answer to all everythings. I wish I knew. I'm with you. You can make, I do have a suspicion, though, that applesauce cake won't be as good the next day as an oil cake. That's my only thing that I think is, like, it's the one you got to eat right then. But it's fine. Yeah.
What kind of oils are you using in your cakes?
I think any neutral tasting oil. So to me, one thing we didn't really go super deeply, but the point of those wheels, especially the fat wheel, is that just how I had said that the olive oil really determines the flavor of the cooking at Chez Panisse, that's because it's a Mediterranean they're cooking all these Mediterranean foods that are from olive oil producing cultures. But if you start something with butter, it's gonna taste French. If you start something with sesame oil, it's gonna taste like it comes from a country that uses sesame oil. So that fat, you could never make, let's say, if you made Indian food and started it with olive oil, it's never really gonna taste quite right, because that's not the fat that's at the foundation of the cooking in that place. They either use sort of a neutral tasting oil or ghee. So one easy change to make your food taste more like the place that you're trying to make, even if it's just like weekend tacos, don't make your weekend tacos with olive oil. Just use a neutral tasting oil. So for most of my cakes, I'll use, and by neutral tasting oil, I mean either a good quality canola oil that comes like GMO and is expeller pressed, or peanut oil. There are milder peanut oils that don't taste super peanutty. Here in California, we have rice bran oil that's made in state and is GMO free and totally neutral tasting. There's even also neutral tasting olive oils, like pure olive oils that you can get that are pretty good too. So those are sort of the good like oils to keep on the. And also the other thing I was about to say, to keep on the back burner. Do not keep your oil near the stove, because the more times the temperature goes up and down, and the more times the sun's rays hit it and it gets light hitting it, the more quickly it's going to go rancid. So keep your oils away from the stove. Keep your spices away from the stove for the same reason, and just put them in a cabinet nearby, but not on your stove.
I think we have some questions. Yeah.
Hi. I had a question actually about sugar. Just the way you put a pinch of, salt often in sweet dishes. In a lot of Indian cooking, that pinch of sugar is what you can't figure out.
Oh.
So I was wondering if you use that to sort of like balance flavors out, because Indian food has a lot of spices.
You've just blown my mind.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Fifth element.
Yeah, we use just the way you use salt in sweet dishes.
Yeah.
So I was wondering.
So I do think, to me, everyone's like, why didn't you put sugar as the fifth element? It should be there. I think sweetness. To me, sweetness is something I'm always looking to exaggerate natural sweetness. So I don't add a lot of sugar into my savory food. It's not something I know a lot about. I do like sweet ingredients, so like pomegranate molasses or balsamic vinegar, or even just, to me, my relationship to the produce, to the farmer's market is really intense. And I will go taste all the English peas at all the different stands to find the sweetest ones, and then I go cook them that day because I know that tomorrow they're not going to be as sweet. They'll have become more starchy. So in my cooking, it's always about trying to find the produce that's already innately sweet and promoting that. But what I do understand about sugar, and I write a little bit about it in the salt chapter and in the acid chapter, is that both of those things are great contrasts for sugar. So to me, most of my understanding of sugar is actually in desserts, but even my desserts, I try to sort of restrain the sweetness and then punch it up with some acid. And one of the coolest, wackiest things I learned in doing the research for this is that when you caramelize sugar, so many things are happening on the molecular level that it's actually becoming less sweet and more acidic, and also all of these other flavors are being introduced, which is why caramel tastes so complex, so much more complex than if you just ate a spoonful of sugar, and why and honey is also actually has a lot of the same properties as well. But if you added sort of a quarter cup of caramelized sugar, of caramel syrup, versus a quarter cup of sugar into some dessert, the caramel version would be much less sweet, and it would actually have a little bit of acid in there. It would be a lot more even and balanced, which is like kind of explains the rise of the like salted caramel. You know, salted caramel is kind of one of those perfect trinities, right? Like there's some butter, cream in there, there's the sugar, there's salt. It's a quadrinity. Salt, and then there's acid, yeah. Yeah. Hi.
Okay, so I was wondering if you put the title in order of importance, or if they're all sort of, like you said, a quadrinity that works hand in hand. If I'm wondering basically if one is more important than the other, or if we should value everything about balance. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for sure, every time someone asks, I have a different answer. I do think if one thing that will make your food taste better is if you learn how to salt properly. But to me, the reason for the order, I think, was that most cooks just walk around, it's like they're always saying salt, fat, acid, salt, fat, acid. So to me, I just stuck heat on the end. But it is like those three, salt, fat, and acid, are the things you're trying to get right. You're trying to get those tastes right in everything that you're tasting for. So if it's a salad, you want that vinaigrette to be balanced in salt, fat, and acid. You want the ingredients in the salad to be balanced in salt, fat, and acid. So to me, they are all four together. Everyone kept trying to get me to put acid last because it was 3 syllables, or just like saying, and I was like, no, this is the way it is. It's salt, fat, acid, heat. And also I wanted salt to be first because it's the simplest to understand. It's just one, it's one chemical, it's one molecule. And if you can get that, it was sort of this gateway into these other things. But learn it all, girl, learn it all, yeah.
Hello. Last Christmas, we had a disaster because we bought a brine turkey and we didn't know what to do with it. What should we have done with a brine turkey?
Well, what do you mean you didn't know what to do with it? Like you didn't put it in the oven and roast it? Or what did you?
Pretty much.
Yeah, you did that.
We stuffed it and then put it in the oven and roasted it.
And it went wrong because the stuffing got really salty or something?
Everything was incredibly salty.
It was too salty.
Yeah.
May I ask, from where did you purchase such a brine turkey?
A butcher shop here in Berkeley.
Okay. So maybe their brine ratio was off. I don't know. I can't speak to your specific disaster, but I do think there is a lot of confusion when it comes to brining. The awesome thing about a turkey, and kind of like, we went through this whole sort of past 20 years of brine your turkey, but the thing I've discovered, because I was really lazy, and at Ecolo where I worked, we had Thanksgiving every year, so I was cooking like 20 turkeys. So I did all these experiments all the time where I would cook like a couple this way, a couple that way. And then actually Bill Nyman, who started raising turkeys on his land, so he would bring me samples. So I went through a whole turkey phase. And I was like, well, I'm going to see what's the buttermilk brined one, what's the unbrined one, what's the spit roasted one, what's the one that I break down. And ultimately I realized more than anything, the most important thing is to give the salt time to go into the bird. And so everyone has this whole thing, we have this idea like, the water in a brine will make your bird moister. Actually, if you just salt it, then you don't have to deal with brine in your fridge. You don't have to deal with someone else's brine ratio, and you just put that salt on there, but put it on Tuesday for Thursday. Give yourself 2 days and let it go in. It sounds like probably the brine ratio that the guys used was off and it was too salty, or the bird was in there for too long, and I'm really sorry about that for your Thanksgiving. I hope you guys still had a good time together. But the other trick I'll say to help your turkey be really moist and nice is spatchcock it. Remove that backbone. It's not that scary. We have the instructions for spatchcocking a chicken in here. I'm sure you can also Google. You can find a video. But once you do that, then you can smash your bird so it lays flat, which means that the heat from the oven is coming at it a lot more evenly. You're going to get a lot more browning, and the whole thing will cook a lot more quickly, which means a lot less chance for that breast meat to get dry. So I usually will spatchcock, and it takes maybe, depending on the size of the bird, like between an hour and a half and 2 hours to cook a whole turkey. Whereas I feel like people do it it's like a 4-hour. It does not need to be a 4-hour thing. Don't do that. Yeah. And also let the bird come up to room temperature before it goes in the oven, which means pull it out of the fridge a couple hours early, because that 25-degree difference in the temperature of your bird is like 1,000,000 times more powerful than any 25-degree difference in the oven temperature. You know, it doesn't matter if it's 375, 400, 425. That part doesn't matter. Bring the bird up. It will cook so much more evenly and quickly.
We have time for a couple more questions. Who's got some back? Yep.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hi, you were talking about fat in cakes, and I was wondering about cakes that have both oil and butter in
Yes,
them.
magical.
The world of fat.
Yeah. So the thing I like about the oil and the butter, well, and I want to dispel the notion that you can absolutely get a very moist butter cake. You just have to know how to treat the butter, and it's about bringing it up to room temperature and making sure you're creaming it just right. So it's a lot more technical. But to me, butter is flavor. It's that buttery, rich flavor. So cakes that have both are kind of the perfect compromise. I'm really into that. One place where I refuse to compromise is crusts. Like, I will not do a crust with shortening. Crust has to be all butter. So a lot of people are like, oh, but the shortening's so easy because your thing will be flakier and better. But you know what? If you know how to treat your butter, and most of it has to do with keeping it very, very cold and keeping everything very, very cold, you can still get that perfect texture. And then you don't have this weird shortening compromise where, like, the thing about shortening is it doesn't melt at the same body as its melting temperature, I think, is higher than your body temperature, which means that when you eat something with shortening, the fat sort of clings to the roof of your mouth. Yeah. And it's real gross. Yeah. And it doesn't melt away in that pleasurable way, like chocolate will melt away at room temperature, at body temperature. Butter melts away by body temperature. So don't, shortening, sorry.
I think I saw the gentleman. There you go.
Hello. So this question ties into a conversation I had last night with a friend. What is your advice to people who say, oh, I'm not into cooking so much, or, oh, it would take me so long to cook something because I don't know any technique, so it won't even be worth it? Because you're so passionate about it.
I mean, I do believe people are always like, you keep saying anyone can learn how to cook, and you're wrong. Anyone can't learn how to cook. Actually. And I do think anyone can learn, but I do think you have to want to, because there's a lot of practicing and messing up that goes along the way. And I think so. Maybe for one of the things that's been, maybe Wendy should answer this.
Can I take this here?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was one of those people.
Yeah.
And I was like not only good at the balance bars, I was also expert at the Whole Foods hot bar. I was like so good at putting that together. That I thought was like enough. And I didn't actually understand like all of the time. I also didn't understand that food is more than just cooking. It's like an experience. And since learning to cook, I have this whole added layer of like how to care for my friends and family in a way that I never could before. I just never really got that. It's like a joyous experience that I never really understood. And I think, now that doesn't mean that I'm like preparing a full meal every night after, working with Samin on this. What it does mean is that I have a few things in my back pocket, and I think that's one really great thing about this book is that it gives you like a few simple things, like a chicken, a frittata, a tart, like whatever it is. A pot of beans. And then so many different things that once you understand how to do those basic things, you can kind of do anything going out from there. And so it made it, for me, when I was that person, totally accessible. And once I learned that, it became like a joy. And it added something to my life instead of taking something away, which is what I thought that it would do.
Okay, the gentleman in white who's been so patient.
Hi, you didn't get to heat, which I assume is temperature heat.
Yes.
But what about spice heat? Because I've used that as kind of the fifth ingredient in making food taste better. So your interesting comments on that.
Yeah. I put spicy things in everything. I love it. But one of the really interesting things I learned about spice is it's actually not necessarily a taste. What is much more about spice is it's causing physical pain on your tongue. No, literally. Yeah. And so, when I say like cooking is sensual and it's about all of the senses, it is another way to sort of perk things up, is to create this sort of feeling experience in your mouth beyond all of the taste experiences. So actually for you, Ms. Limited Salt, maybe you want to up your Calabrian chili paste, which is my favorite of the spicy things. Do you know that stuff? You can buy it at the they have it in all the Italian groceries. It's so good. I put it in everything. It's neon red. It's amazing. So good. But yeah, so I'm with you. Put spice in everything. Bring people along with you on the ride.
One quick question, butter salted or unsalted?
Oh, I both. Yeah, I eat salted butter on everything, but I generally cook with unsalted butter because you never know how much salt any particular company is putting in their thing. And so I want to control salt. I want to know when I'm adding salt, how much salt I'm adding. So, I mean, if worst comes to worst and all I have is salted butter, I'll cook with it, but I'll be more mindful that I'm using that and I'll hold back on salt.
Before we go, I wanted to ask you both what's next. I mean, besides that they're going to be signing books at the table in the back with Green Apple, but Wendy, what's your next project?
Well, I mean, like I never thought that I would be working on a cookbook, and now I'm actually doing something related to food for a next project. I think in part because working with Samin, I was paying attention a lot more to food and food illustration and stumbled across an incredible cookbook made by an illustrator and a graphic designer in the 40s that has never been published, and we're bringing that out this October. A woman named C.P. Pinellas. It's called Leave Me Alone with the Recipes.
Super beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book. So it celebrates her, this cookbook, but mostly just this woman who has gone kind of forgotten because she was a woman in the 40s and 50s, and so we're bringing her out into the public this October.
And Samin, what about you? What's next?
It's very exciting.
Very exciting.
Very exciting. This book is going to become a show starring me! With animations from Wendy.
It'll be so fun.
Groundbreaking, pioneering.
Yeah.
So fun.
Well, thank you all for coming. The audience gets the last shot. One last question. It's got to be a humding. Okay, you...
I'm not allowed to say.
She's sworn to secrecy. But so watch for it. When
screen near you.
When do you begin and what's
It'll
in it?
It'll probably be out next year.
And just before we get the last question, just say a little bit about what does that mean that this book becomes a show?
So it's going to become a 4-hour documentary series, and I'm going to travel all around the world and show you how this really is a universal method for cooking. And there's going to be all sorts of women food scientists. Woo! And all sorts of people of color. Woo! And we're going to go to all the countries in the axis of evil. Yay!
Love it. All right, here's the last question.
You had said that you didn't like food photography. Why?
Oh, no, I love food photography. I just knew it wasn't the right thing for this book because anytime I've been involved in a food photo shoot, and in fact, go by bonappetit.com.
Oh my God,
there's a beautiful thing I worked on last year that just came out, but they're very labor intensive. They involve so many different people, stylists and perfect lighting. And to me, food photos are sort of a capturing of something in its most perfect moment. And I didn't want to put that message in with this, which is all about use what you have, make what you have. If I tell you it's made with chicken and you only have pork, use your pork. If I tell you it's made with spinach and you only have chard, use your chard. I didn't want you to be bound to some version of perfection that I was trying to sell you. I felt like that would be disingenuous here in this book, because the message is empowering you to use whatever you have and make it your own best. So, but that's not to say I absolutely love food photography. I think it's amazing. So, yeah. Oh, one more. Oh. Yell it out, peeps. I'm going to do some.
She was asked, do you still do classes?
Do I still do classes? I will do some more cooking classes, probably at 18 Reasons in San Francisco, which is my home base.
Yeah.
So, but
why
I'm
don't
not
you
sure
just, while you're at it, tell people what 18 Reasons is and
18
why
Reasons
you chose there to teach.
Well, it's an amazing cooking. It's a tiny little community and cooking and art space in San Francisco on 18th Street. It's the sort of nonprofit arm of By Right Market and By Right Creamery. And we've kind of grown up together, 18 Reasons and I, and they were looking for a house sort of basic cooking curriculum at the time that I was developing this into a curriculum. And so we started talking, and they said, let's make this your space. And so I've just taught it over and over and over and over again. And it was a really great sort of place for me to understand what worked for students and what didn't work, and what people were picking up, and when I wasn't being clear enough. And I love it, and I love the people who come there. And it's also now married to another nonprofit, so now every class that's taught there funds a ton of cooking education for disadvantaged, for like low-income families, people like recent immigrants, senior citizens, kids, all sorts of people who otherwise wouldn't get like cooking instruction. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Can I ask one more?
Yeah.
Hey.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So how do you build up an intuition of how things are supposed to taste when you're kind of your own judge?
You already know, though, because we all are wired as humans to know what deliciousness is. And so you already know what deliciousness is. You just haven't been paying attention. So your favorite foods, like what are some of your favorite foods? Do you love tacos or pizza or whatever? Right. Those things, when you go have a delicious taco, or when you go, this is an example I love using, is like when you go somewhere has like a burrito place that has all the salsas and sour creams, and you're like, oh yeah, this burrito needs some sour cream and some guacamole, and I'm going to get that pineapple salsa and this thing. You're already doing that thing to get your own balance of salt and fat and acid. You already know what's delicious. You also know the opposite, which is when you go to a restaurant that has a million things you want to order on the menu, you don't get them all. You don't get the fried chicken and the ice cream sundae and the pizza and the hamburger and the Caesar salad and blue cheese salad. Like, it's too much. So you sort of already know in your bones what you can handle and what tastes good. You just don't necessarily have the language to articulate that. And that's what I've tried to do here, is help give you the language so that you can also start to learn how to pay more attention. And you can start to remember. I always say, like, for me, I've traveled a lot, I've like eaten a lot. I love understanding who made something and why the bolognese on this side of the river is different than the grandmother who makes the bolognese on that side of the river in Bologna, and she adds the pork and she adds the sausage or whatever. And the thing is every time I've eaten those things, I've tried to keep like a little mental snapshot, a little flavor card in my flavor file, so that I can always return to that. And you're doing that too. When you go eat a delicious taco, you're like, what was in that taco? Like, how do I recreate that? You know, and you're like, so you think, and as you become more attuned, you could be like, oh, there was probably a little bit of oregano and bitter orange in that. Or you can do what I do, which is like obsessively internet stalk things. And so then I'm like Googling, what's in that carnitas? You know, like, what's the traditional thing? Or calling someone or going there. And you just start making this filing cabinet in your own brain.
I've actually seen this. I've seen Samin like stop people after eating something and go, tell me what was in that thing you made. That was amazing. Don't be shy.
So yeah, you just start internet stalking, obviously, yeah.
I like the thought of a woman stalking carnitas.
Yeah.
Can we sneak one last one in? What do you think? Okay,
yeah,
good.
You go for it. Oh.
Lightning round.
Wow. I know.
Perfect. Okay.
It's a good question. Yeah. It is. You know, I don't know a ton about the cottage food industry. Yeah, but I do think, you know, there's that service Josephine, which is sort of the like home-to-home version of Blue Apron kind of thing. And I'm really into that. And I do think there should be more trust. And I do think there is nothing like a home-cooked meal. And yeah, I think we should trust people. And just having seen a lot of the inside of a lot of restaurants, like, it's not necessarily any cleaner or better.
Well, and La Cocina in San Francisco also tries to kind of answer that as well.
Yeah.
All right, are we okay? You all, thank you so much for coming to the Bay Area Book Festival.
Yeah, we're going to go back there.
Signing in the back. Wendy MacNaughton, Samin Nosrat, Davia Nelson. When in doubt, cook.
Wendy, Samin, and our moderator, Davia. Let's hear it for him one more time.